Straight away, let's begin with a top story this morning about schools flooding when it comes to reopening, and with schools set to reopen on January 4th. Several primary and secondary schools in Nyando constituency in Kisumu County will not reopen due to raging floods that caused extensive damages to classrooms. Kevin Ogutu joins us live from Kisumu. Ogutu, good morning and happy holidays. So this is not the first time that we're talking about flooding here on KTN News Center. Just a few months ago, it was the same thing we're talking about. Even talked to the Member of Parliament, in charge of Nyando constituency, talking about the government trying to, merge some schools. Is that the same situation with just 5 days remaining before schools reopen?
Well, thank you so much, Brenda. And as you put it, as the clock ticks towards January 4th, 2021, the date when the schools are supposed to officially reopen after they were closed in March due to COVID-19 pandemic, it is evident that learning in a number of schools in Nyando constituency is going to be a tall order. Well, as you've indicated, the area Member of Parliament, Jared Okello, talked about really merging schools to ensure that learning goes on. But we are talking about the need for social distancing, and a number of schools that are affected here only survived after the partial reopening in October that allowed grade 4, class 8 candidates and form 4 candidates to continue with their term 2 academic calendars. But we are looking towards a grim future here when it comes to matters education, because here we are going to have all the classes, learning operations going on in all the classes, primary and secondary. To start with Nyando constituency, we have Mombasa Secondary School that has now been declared unfit for any learning activity. We have Kandaria Primary and Secondary Schools. We have Oseth Primary and Nyamurundu Primary Schools, all within the Nyando constituency, and these were hosting hundreds of learners. The issue here is whether the government is committed to rebuilding these schools. The merging of these particular schools have not been enough, and given that we had the same problem when the partial reopening of schools was done in October, and now that we are talking about all the classes resuming, then it means it could even be grimmer. But away from Nyando constituency, we also have the same situation whereby 15 schools have been taken over by the Lake Baringo in Baringo South. And so this put together means that we needed to have a serious commitment in terms of resources from the national government to ensure that this is fast-tracked. Of course, later on we'll be talking to a number of education stakeholders, especially in Kisumu County, to see if at all there's been any development. Remember, the Minister, the Cabinet Secretary for Education, Professor George Magoha, has declined responding to journalists whenever he comes to the lakeside county of Kisumu, and this has left a number of our questions going unanswered. So how do we move from here? This will mean that a number of COVID-19 regulations will have to be lifted for the sake of having every other learner in class, as advanced by the Cabinet Secretary for Education, Professor George Magoha. He's been going around inspecting the level of preparedness, especially when it comes to the making of the desks for the learners as the clock ticks towards January 4th. So as you asked me, the future is pretty grim when it comes to matters education, and this does not just start and end with the education in the Nyando sub-constituency that has been affected so much by the floods. And here, the floods we're talking about, Brenda, is what the backflow from Lake Victoria, which has rendered about 32,000 residents of Kisumu homeless. This means that those who are displaced in September last year spent their second Christmas in camps where several families are huddled together, and there is no regard for the social distancing. So as you put it, it is the situation as it is here.
Right, Ogutu, in a minute, just before I let you go in a minute, you've given us the list of the secondary schools that have been affected. What about primary schools? How many schools have so far been affected by flooding?
Well, in Nyando we have got Kandaria Primary School, Oseth Primary School, and Nyamurundu Primary Schools. Those are 3 primary schools that have been affected. And remember, these schools, the learners here are supposed to merge with learners in other classes that are bit raised But as we pointed out, and as other stakeholders have pointed out in separate interviews prior to today, it is evident that this is not something that may be sustainable. It means that the long-term solution to this ought to be identifying an alternative land and really reconstructing. Remember, this is a backflow from Lake Victoria. It is no longer the question of River Nyando bursting its banks. So before a long-term solution to the backflow from Lake Victoria is found, the best thing is to get an alternative place. And this means that the government will have to spend a lot of money to really ensure that this is a success. But apart from this end, we also have the same scenario here. But in other parts of the country, and we are talking about Baringo South. So this means in essence that probably before the 4th of January, we may need to get a more comprehensive statement from the various government stakeholders on what the kind of scenario really that the learners so affected by the floods in this particular area will be facing. Remember, merging of these classes and sometimes the resources are not even adequate means that the situation just becomes graver, Brenda.
All right, Kevin Ogutu, thank you so much, and you'll give us more update because it is a developing story in the Nyando constituency, Kisumu County. Once again, asante sana, Kevin Ogutu. Now, from Kisumu County, I'd like us to head to Embu, where from a locust invasion to the novel coronavirus pandemic, 2020 has had its fair share of misfortunes. And with just one day left to the new year, Embu residents are hopeful of better times ahead. Our reporter Moige William has more.
A good